Hi everyone, welcome to the Do God podcast. I am Rob Watson, and in today's episode, I'm speaking with Jackie O'Carroll, who's someone that has been leading the way for years when it comes to personal spiritual growth and has a wealth of wisdom behind her. Most recently, her journey has taken her towards becoming an end-of-life doula, which ties together her years of experience as a children's nurse, a life coach, as well as her studies into emotional intelligence and leadership. She also has practical knowledge of setting up local communities and the role they can play in building connection, which is something I sorely miss right now in this world. So first of all, Jackie, thank you for speaking with me today.
Oh, thank you, Rob. It's good to be here.
Great. Well, you reached out to me a while ago on Facebook, and it was something when I checked out a little bit what you were doing, and I think one of the titles that you have is like holding space for grief and loss. And when you were mentioning to me that you're now an end of life doula, it's just something that seems very timely at the moment with what's going on in the world. We've must be like almost 12 months going through this pandemic, and it's affecting everyone's lives in some way. And death seems to be at the forefront, getting pushed right in front of us. And it seems to be, well, it is something that maybe as human beings we're not that comfortable with. It's not something, particularly in the West. I think they are so much more in the East, but in the West we kind of shut the door to that. We all celebrate birth, but death is still considered a very somber kind of place. And there's an element to that because there is sadness. But anyway, I won't go on too much, but if you can just let people know a little bit about what some people might not even know what a doula is, so explain what a doula is and your experience of being an end of life doula.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's true, that people find it very, very difficult to talk about death. And people's response to when people die is always, or generally, is awkward, and people don't know what to say. People are much more comfortable talking about what they think about what happens after death, the afterlife, than they are about actual death. So my journey has been one of being involved in supporting people through death and dying, way back from when I was a nurse, a student nurse at 18. I remember that very clearly, the first time, being with someone who died. It was very scary as a young, student. And then, most recently, I trained for 2 years as an end-of-life doula. Which was really interesting, and I did some of that work as a doula. The word doula actually means companion. So most people are familiar with birth doula, someone who acts as a companion to a woman or a couple through in preparation for birth. A death doula is the other end of life. So being a companion to someone who's dying, but also supporting their family and enabling them to, often it's enabling them to explore and look at the things that they want to complete before they die. So it might be to do with, difficult relationships, or it might be they want to create some sort of memory or legacy. And a doula would help with that, as well as the actual physical care of a dying person. Unfortunately, my journey as a doula was interrupted by things that happened at the beginning of 2019. So in 2019, I had planned to complete that training. But unfortunately, my older sister, had chronic leukemia, and she was waiting to start some new treatment. And she asked me to go to France with her early that year. So I decided to put the doula training on hold and just focus on my sister, really. And then sadly, in February, she got flu and got very, very sick and ended up in intensive care and subsequently died. But what I felt during the 3-4 weeks that she was in intensive care, I just had this very, very clear sense that everything that I'd done in my life, my nurse training, the coaching, the doula training, emotional intelligence work, it had all been in preparation for being with my sister in those last few weeks. And I felt an absolute it was a gift to me, even though it was really difficult to be with her and to see what was happening to her. She was ventilated. Some of the treatments were really pretty awful. And, but, you know, it just felt like everything I had, all the skills I have were there to support her. And that is very much what my work as a doula had been about. And also, I wrote recently about my sister unknowingly gave me this gift, which was the gift of grief. And I've used that phrase, and I've noticed that some people are not comfortable with that. Like, how can you see grief as a gift? Grief is terrible. It's sad. It's, you know, it makes you angry. It breaks your heart open. But for me, that's where the gift lies in grief and loss, that it opens us up. And I talk now, and I'm about to offer some teaching and course on how grief and loss help us in touching the tender places. And I found that in the doula work too, in the doula training, that we have those places, what I call the tender places. And sometimes we don't even know that they're there because we've covered them up and we've buried them so well. And if we were to visualize them, we'd perhaps see them as these dark places with, you know, mud or cobwebs or places that we just don't go to. And grief, because of the depth of the emotion, grief takes us to those places if we allow it. And that's the thing. We live in a society that wants to avoid those deep emotions. And a way of avoiding those is to live much more in a materialistic world. And so we talk about, you know, retail therapy and I don't know, whatever you can think of, watching lots of TV or drinking, I don't know. There's many. And they enable us to keep those places tucked away. And if there's any risk that we might go there, then we do something to stop it from happening. And you know, lots of people don't even know that that's what's happening to them. So for me, that's the beauty of grieving, that it can take us to that place and open our hearts.
Yeah, that, and just when you were talking, I was actually getting like shivers a little bit when you were talking about that bit when you were that time with your sister and how it was a gift, and in a way that was your final piece of training for you to have. And it's interesting as well, because I often talk about this, how everything in our life leads us up to whatever point we're at now. And it's interesting, obviously you got a lot more experience than me, but you don't realize when you're going to be a nurse when you're 18 that experience is going to be helping your elder sister in, you know, 40 years or whatever that time is. So it's fascinating, isn't it? But yeah, I find it it's a really good conversation to have. And it's interesting you mentioned about alcohol then, and yeah, you know, people now, it's smartphones, just anything to distract us. But when you think about alcohol and you think about funerals, you know, the experience I've got going way back, everyone would be wearing black. It would be, you know, casket going in, very sad, lots of tears. And then the way to numb that is to drink an absolute, you know, a barrel load of alcohol to just numb the pain. And alcohol's got its place, but I think it's definitely been, you know, definitely gets overused by us, and it is something that we use to sort of distract us from feeling what's going on. I went through a spell where I didn't drink for 4 years, and I had to feel all the stuff that came up. Where in the past I would be like, "Oh, I'm going to have a drink at the weekend. That'll sort that out." But it doesn't sort it out. It just, you know, it just numbs it. So I had that spell of just not drinking. It was just like, yeah, I've got to feel all this stuff. You know, it's got to come up, and I've got to. But yeah, so it's a fascinating one. And when you talk about it, it reminds me of, I've listened to quite a bit of Ram Dass. The listeners will know that I speak about him a bit, and he spent a lot of time with the dying. And I think it's just something that's so important that we can do more and get in touch with. And of course, you know, it's generally our greatest fear, isn't it? You know, but I often find that a lot of us, like, it's inevitable. It's coming to every single one of us. Yet people live their life in fear and then don't go and explore and do the things you really want to do, or to let go and let free, because of that fear of what might be. But it's coming anyway. You know, I'd rather live generally a shorter, richer life than a long, drawn out one where I was just terrified of everything and not willing to look at stuff.
Absolutely.
So where does it take you at the moment now? Obviously during the pandemic, maybe that's something to touch on, because it's been a really interesting year, and it's been pushed in people's faces even more. Death just been constantly, you know, there. And what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, well, we are faced with death every day if we watch the news. It's interesting, on the radio the other day, there was a discussion about how that news is presented, because, and I've noticed it now, I listen to the news as opposed to watching it really, and they say there's been, you know, so many deaths today. And the discussion was, could we not say so many people have died? And I was reflecting on that and thinking, well, why don't newsreaders say that? And I thought maybe it's because when we say it's deaths rather than people, it kind of distances a little bit. You know, we don't have to think of those people who have died. And I think that's a really interesting one, because the Prime Minister does it the same when he does his, his updates. They all say deaths as opposed to, and I think that's what we do. That's what we do with death. We try and distance ourselves from it, even though, as you have said, we can't avoid it. You know, it's coming to us all at some point. And I mean, I'm a bit older than you, so not that I think about my own death, but I have. And part of, a day that we did in the doula training was very much about thinking about our own death. What would we like it to be like? You know, and obviously you think, well, I'd like to be really old, but reasonably healthy. I want all my family there. And, you know, that I want to be at home with all my comforts. But so many people, that isn't how death is for them. And so we avoid thinking about it. And I have been and am comfortable talking about death. I've supported families as a nurse. I supported families. I was a sister on a neonatal unit for a number of years, and we obviously had premature babies who died. And in those days, long time ago, talking about the early 80s, we'd only just started taking photographs of babies when they died. And even that, for some people, some staff struggled with that. So it's all changed now, Rob. I was at the women's a couple of years ago. I was volunteering in the women's hospital in Liverpool, and I've seen that it's very, very different, which is lovely. But in those days, we tried to avoid it, really, even though we had, you know, a baby who died, and there was a family who needed to be supported and to be encouraged to hold the baby. And, you know, and I saw that very clearly, and I saw that as my role, to enable families to have that memory of holding the baby, being with the baby, maybe even, you know, coming back the next day to hold the baby again, or let their children hold the baby. And we had staff who found that they were so uncomfortable with that, you know, the idea of keeping on holding the baby that's died. But that's part of grief, you know, part of being able to let go and to accept what has happened. And I firmly believe that the work that I did then, and that what others were doing, was a part of that process that we've moved into now, where I think there are nurses now who are much more able and more well equipped to support families in that. Sorry, I don't know where we started with the question now.
Oh, it's okay. It all ties in nicely. I think when you talk about that, that must be one of the toughest things for anyone to go through, to lose a baby at such a young age. You know, we've become more accepting of if like my granddad died when he's, you know, late 70s, early 80s, you can talk about, oh, he had a great life and look at all his children and his grandkids and he did this and he was, you know, but for something that's so young, and even, I don't know, even a child might even be worse, a child under 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, that when they built a really strong bond with the family. And then, that I know a few friends that it's happened to, and your heart really goes out for them. You feel like you almost, it really touches you, and you could only imagine that kind of experience. And I know there's a gift in all that as well, but God, what a tough gift. And that must be.
And I don't want to make light of it by using those words, but, and, I am in contact with people who, lost a baby many years ago and still grieve for that baby. I've had other children perhaps, but the grief is still there. And, there is how we connect with that grief. Like I said before, if it closes us down, it's not helpful. But if it opens us up, if it changes the way that we are towards others and the way we are toward ourselves, that we have more compassion for ourselves because of having that experience. I think the same applies as well. I'm thinking about, when I had a miscarriage and people didn't know what to say. And I tried to talk about that with people about losing a baby. But miscarriage, it's changing now, but again, this is a long time ago. People didn't talk about it. And actually, I remember talking to my mum about it, and she told me, when I was in my 30s, she said, oh yeah, I had 2 miscarriages. When my mum was that age, lots of women had miscarriages before they even knew that they were pregnant, and now and of course it wasn't talked about, but now we are becoming more open to talking about that and talking about our grief and our loss around that. Yeah.
So in terms of the steps to moving through grief and potentially, staying open to it and allowing it to move through us, because I think often things hit us in our lives and they don't pass through us. They literally just go in and that's it. We shut off. We use anything to distract ourselves without realizing all those things are kind of piling up within us. What advice or process do people tend to go on that you would say to people to help them to explore? I'm sure most people, it is individual, but there must be certain, obviously talking therapy, just having someone around you, but I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, as we've said, we live in a society that is in denial about death. And so that's the first thing about grief, that people don't want to hear about it a lot of the time. And we've also pathologized it. So we've made it, it's made to feel like if you're grieving for more than, a certain period, then you need help. Yeah. And actually, I see it as the opposite, that grief is normal. Grief is this rich, rich response to something which is breaking us open. And grief is not a journey that we start here and finish here. Grief is with us always. There is no escape from that. We can press it down, we can distract ourselves, but it will be there. So the first step really is to accept how we're feeling, and to just be with that, to be with those emotions. And that's the hard bit, isn't it? When you've just lost someone close to you, someone you've loved, someone who's been a part of your life, for example, sitting with those feelings is the most painful thing in life, I think. And yet we can't escape it, because if we try and avoid it, it will pop up somewhere else. I remember that when my dad died, I think I had 2 small children, and I thought, I don't think I consciously thought, but I didn't really grieve. I felt like I didn't really have the space for that. And then I remember at some point in a year or so going to a funeral for a baby, and I was absolutely distraught. I had to sort of lie down at the back of the church, and I knew it was about my dad. although I was sad for what had happened to my friend, I knew that what was coming up was this grief for my dad that I had never really expressed. So that would be the first thing I would say. And then, yeah, absolutely, communication, having someone who will just sit and listen, not advise, but just sit and listen with no judgment whatsoever. And then to offer ourselves compassion. And we struggle with that, we struggle sometimes to offer ourselves love, compassion, and kindness. And those are the things that we need. We're better at beating ourselves up. We're better at saying, oh, I shouldn't be feeling like this anymore. I've got to get back to work. And even that, you think about, I don't know, in some places you might get a couple of days off, to go to the funeral, and then they expect you to be back in work, back to the way that you were. When my brother died, I was a school nurse at the time, and I went back to work, and I was seeing a family, and I suddenly was absolutely speechless. I couldn't speak. And I went to see my boss, and I said, I can't do this job at the moment. I can't connect with people at that level because there's just too much grief in there. So I had to take more time off. And that's what we need to do, to be with it. That's the really hard bit, to be with it. The gift comes later, but accepting and being with it is the first thing. Yeah. And having someone to be with you, to listen, hold you physically. I know that's not possible at the moment, but yeah.
Yeah, that's makes so much sense, doesn't it? And I think that just when you touch on about how important it is for us to validate our feelings, because I can know myself sometimes. I can talk about it, but then I won't. I'll validate them to an extent, but then I'll say, well, oh, but I know other people are going through a lot worse. We can often do that. Whatever you've gone through, you can always say, well, I know other people are experiencing it worse or this, and I should just. And that's where the validation and the acknowledgement comes through. It's like, and it's so important to have someone there opposite you to listen, even just to say to you, that must be so tough what you're going through now, rather than an element of, oh, try and fix this. This is what you can do. I know that in my past, my experience has been, I'm a bit of a fixer, and maybe it's a bit of a male thing where it's, an element of like, but now I've got a lot better with just listening, because sometimes that's all someone needs, is just someone to listen to. They don't need answers. What is the answer sometimes, and who am I to try and give an answer to someone? It's like, it's all ego, isn't it? It's like, no, the best thing I can do. I heard a great quote once that said, I think it's, knowledge speaks, but wisdom listens. And that, I just find that's so true. And I think I used the word wisdom in the introduction about you. So, and that's definitely coming through for me. It'd be
I think just to pick up on that, Rob, about the listening, because we can listen on a number of different levels. We can be listening, but what's going on in our head is what we're going to say next. So that's kind of half listening. And then there's listening, what I might call deep dive listening, where we are listening intently. It's what, counselors are trained to do. It's what, I have done this kind of training where we're just sitting, but we're also listening to what is underneath the words. So what is coming from the heart underneath those words, the feelings, the emotions, the desperation perhaps. And there is no response to that in terms of words or advice. It is just, like you say, you may say, that sounds so difficult for you. And that's just validating what the person is saying and feeling. And that is so important. That is one of the greatest gifts that we can offer to others who need to be heard, to validate what they're saying, but also what they're feeling. And that might just be an intuition that we sense what they're feeling, but we can validate that by just being there. Yeah. We like to give advice in some of those situations because we're very uncomfortable with the strength of feeling that we're hearing, or the other person is expressing, and that we're uncomfortable with that perhaps. So we try and give advice to sort of push it back, if you like, give it back to them. I don't want this. But also, perhaps a bit of ego there of like, oh yeah, I've been there. I know what to do. So these are all traps that we fall into, me included. So being aware of that, of how we can listen deeply and intently. And sometimes there are questions that we might ask which enable the person to just go that little bit deeper. It would be an open question. I'm not saying that's the right thing to do when somebody's grieving, but at some point that can be helpful. Yeah.
When you mentioned about when often you're in a conversation to someone, we've all got it in us, the ego particularly, it's just waiting for them other person to finish speaking so I can then, I've got to say what I do. And I find that doing this podcast has been a real lesson for me. It's a bit actually a challenge because there's an element of me thinking, well, I need to be thinking of a new question or a new response, but it ties me with a lot of the Eckhart Tolle stuff that I've been delving into deeply more recently, and how he talks about when he goes up on stage and he's talking in front of, I think he did one last year in front of 40,000 people. He said he doesn't know what he's going to say until the words start coming out. Now, obviously, he's a master of this, and he had a huge awakening, I think, when he was 29. He was homeless at one point. He was completely, his mind was destroying his life. He has a sharp awakening and almost detaches himself from his ego and realize that he's the observer of what's going on. But I find that so inspiring to say, just to, the word, what's supposed to come out of you will come out of you when the time is right, rather than be thinking about all these steps ahead. And this is what I'm going to say. Like, for instance, it's nice. When I first started this podcast, I would write down about 30 questions and I'd go through them all, in order. And now I just have a few sentences and just see where they end up. So taking us into, it's obviously we're talking about this already, emotional intelligence and leadership, and it ties in with this. Maybe if you can just explain to people what emotional intelligence is and how sorely lacking it is potentially in society. And particularly, I think, a big thing for me is education and children and the system that we're putting them in. And, it's still that survival of the fittest. It's very competitive. It breeds insecurity. There doesn't seem to be, where's the real life skills that we need? So it'd be good to just sort of touch on that.
Emotional intelligence. Well, for me, emotional intelligence begins with self-awareness. And in 2006, I think it was 2004, anyway, somewhere around there, I did a year's postgraduate emotional intelligence course. It's probably one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. I nearly left 2 or 3 times. It was residential, like 1 weekend a month, I think, or anyway, it was really tough. And it was tough because it was revealing all these things about myself that either I wasn't aware of or I didn't like. And I used to tell this story of being on a train station, in Liverpool, with a big rucksack, and the announcer announced that my train had been cancelled. So I thought, it was okay, I'll get the next one. I had a connection to make, and I was being picked up at the end of the journey. Then another announcement, the next train was cancelled. So I just lost it at that point. So I found the guard, whatever, station guy, and I started shouting and swearing. This was a long time ago. And he said to me, I think I was in my 40s, he said to me, if you don't stop shouting and swearing, I'll have to put you off the station. And I'm like, Jackie, you're in your 40s. You can't be put off the station. This is ridiculous. So I calmed down eventually and I went and apologized to him. And I tell that story because I had no awareness about the impact of my behavior. I was just, I was angry. I wasn't going to make my connection. It made my whole day go wrong. And it was only when I started the emotional intelligence work that I began to realize and to understand where that anger was coming from, and also to understand how the impact that I have on other people when I behave in certain ways. And that is the key to emotional intelligence. And in fact, when I was on the course, we had to role play, and I chose to role play that scenario. And I had to play the guard, the guard on the station, and someone else was me. And it was absolutely humiliating to watch someone else behaving as me, angry, swearing. I was like, okay, I get it. So, yeah, being self-aware is absolutely critical to the way we behave towards other people, and being aware of how everything we do and say has an impact on those around us. And I don't always remember that, but I've come such a long way, such a long way. And I've learned a lot too, because I've been married for 39 years to a man who trained as a psychologist and worked as a psychologist for many years. So I've learned a lot from him. Like, when you say to somebody, you make me feel really angry. And he would always say to me, no, Jackie, you make yourself feel angry. And I'd be like, and eventually I began to understand it. Like, yeah, I take responsibility for all of my emotions, for the way that I react or respond. And one of my greatest teachers has been Pema Chodron, who's a Buddhist nun. And that's one of the things that I learned through her, that we learn to respond to others rather than react, and that we take full responsibility for our response. It is never about the other person. When I first heard that, I was like, don't be ridiculous. How can that possibly be right? And that is what I've learned over many years, painfully. No matter what that other person does, says, behaves, it is always about how I respond to that. And I take full responsibility for my response. That's hard. That is a hard journey, but it's so freeing, Rob. It just frees us completely from being at the whim of those people around us, be they politicians, friends, family, doesn't matter. We take responsibility for how we respond. And yeah, that's the journey that I'm on. Yeah. And for me, that is emotional intelligence. That's where it begins and ends, really. Yeah.
Wow. It's interesting hearing you talk, whether it be when you're doing the training to be a doula, right at the end, you had to spend the time with your sister. When you're doing the emotional intelligence thing, you were suddenly tested doing that course on the train station. And then when you have this awareness that it's how we how we respond to situations, and we have to take responsibility. It's often life, as you're going along, life is giving you initiations to go through in them stages. And I find myself with stuff, we might delve into a great book or be learning something new. And it'll be in them moments that life will be testing you to see if you're getting the message, and you're going to pass these tests. Because I find if you don't look out for life's cues and lessons, well, those lessons will keep getting put in your face, and they'll get stronger and harder until you finally get the message. And rather than blaming life for it, I heard this great thing once saying that life doesn't happen to you, it happens through you. So if you can be from that awareness and realize that everything in front of you has been put in front of you to live and learn and grow, then you can see life as this beautiful tapestry, this journey of growing and evolving. And I think about spiritual development a lot. And I think that's what we're here for now. And this past year, people just want life to get back to normal, but I don't think it'll get back to normal. I don't think there'll be a normal. I think there's an element of we're going into this new earth, new world. And we need to learn those lessons. And I think the next few years or so many are going to be really uncomfortable as we look, because the way life has been and the systems that are in place for me are not fit for purpose and do not support the evolution of humanity and the planet. And unfortunately, fortunately, those systems have to break down. But unfortunately, that's an uncomfortable process that we're going to have to go through. And it could take a decade, 2 decades. It could take, I often think about some of the things that I do, and I think about planting a tree. I'm willing to do stuff now in this life that will help beyond me being here. Like if it takes me planting this now to do it, that's going to help my daughter's daughter for them. Then that's sort of like a bit of a great lesson for me. And I don't know how I got going down to that. That's the thing with this. Sometimes I talk and I'm on point about the emotional intelligence and it just goes off. But I think you make some amazing points, and yeah, it's really really fascinating. And what do you think about how we can potentially change the way we teach children around emotional intelligence? I know things, for me, I always think it all starts at the home. But if kids are going out and families are so busy, and the kids are going to school, and they're not necessarily, the way I think about what kids are getting taught, they're getting taught, and in a way it's crazy, we're getting taught to memorize stuff for tests, when now the world we live in, you can just type into Google and you get the answer. Like we don't need much of the stuff that they're teaching us, because it's accessible in the ether. We need to be taught, I think, emotional health, physical health, how to grow your own food, how to build and stuff, make stuff, but yeah, what do you think about education, applying this in an educational setting for children, or how you would potentially adopt it with your own kids?
Yeah, I'm not an expert on education, Rob. I have 2 grown-up kids who I hope are doing okay. I think one of the things that I've learned, certainly in bringing up my own children, is about critical thinking. About questioning. And I remember when my son, when I did my degree, I was 29, 30, and it was called Literature, Life and Thought. I did it in Liverpool, and one of those courses was history. I sat in a tutorial, and the tutor said something about what did we make of this particular document, or I just had this light bulb moment. I remember jumping up. I was kind of jumping around the room like, I can have an opinion about history? I don't understand that. That's not how I was taught history in school. I was taught, open the textbook, read it, learn it, blah, blah, blah. And it was just the most exciting thing to find out that actually you could question different books, different voices, different traditions. I was just blown away by it. And then years later, my son was about 14, 15. He was showing me his history homework. He had 3 different sources of the same piece of history. One was like a woman's own story of what had happened. One was textbook, and again, I just got that same excitement. I said to him, do you know, I was 30 before I knew that. And look at you at 15, you're already knowing that you can question, and you can have that thinking about the way that we're presented with information. For me, that is absolutely crucial to education. And that also then leads us to where we were before about emotional intelligence, having that awareness about the way that we think and the way that we feel. That for me, that's crucial for children and the way that we bring our children up. But also things like lots of schools now are teaching mindfulness and meditation, or even yoga, which is such a beautiful thing for children to have at that age, a skill that for life, isn't it? Yeah
For sure. And then just
one of the things that takes me to is that thirst for knowledge and awareness and reading. I grew up with that. That's one of the wonderful gifts from my parents, both of my parents. My mum reading novels, and my dad kind of reading texts. And I mean, he was a minister, so he was really into theology. But I got that. He always had a pile of books, and we went to the library every Saturday, and we'd take out 4 to 6 books, and we'd read them, then we'd take them back the next. That's, for me, that's such a gift to give that to children. I mean, maybe it's not books anymore, it's online or whatever, but the reading, having that reading and that thirst for knowing things, or not. I mean, I love reading novels. I'm always got 1 or 2 more on the go. And then, as you've mentioned, spiritual books that teach us and guide us. Ram Dass is, Pema Chodron is a great teacher of mine. Jeff Foster writes beautifully. Poetry as well. I love poetry. I find poetry really, really helpful on my journey. Mary Oliver, lots of different poets. So that, for me, that's another. I hope I've given that gift to my children, to have that thirst for books and for just wanting to have much more awareness of other people's lives, and different ways that we can understand how other people live. Because again, that's another element of emotional intelligence, having that desire to understand how other people function and behave, and why they behave in certain ways. You got me on books now, Rob. Reading a great book at the moment. I dip in and out of it. It's called The Body Knows. I think it's called The Body Knows the Score.
Yeah.
And it's about trauma. I recommend it to anybody. It's very easy to read, but he's a psychiatrist, researcher, and it's just opened me up to being much more aware about how trauma affects us, particularly people who've had traumatic experiences as children, and how that affects us physically as well as emotionally and mentally. Just a brilliant book. I'd highly recommend.
Yeah, it's on our bookshelf. We've dived into that. Yeah, it's very true. I had someone else on the podcast called Brian Penny, who he had a lot of childhood trauma, and it actually developed into him having like a 15-year addiction to heroin. And it was all traced back to experiences, basically a newborn child. And that was the time when I've been thinking about this recently. Maybe I'll mention it. We often see maybe what someone has done. Say someone has done a horrific crime, and it gets splashed on the media, and everyone vilifies it, and they need to be thrown away, lock the key, bring back, the death penalty and all this sort of stuff. Yet that person, what happened to them when they were a kid? Did they experience horrific abuse as a child? Did their abuser as well, going back, it becomes this generational thing in ties. And I think we're very quick to blame someone for their actions and lock away the key. Yet I think we're shown in this country, in America, that we have a pretty poor record of, incarcerations and how many people go back, where I think it's in Norway. They don't treat the prisoners like that. Most of them have keys to their own cell. They have keys to the kitchen. They almost have these little islands that they live on in houses. And they have only 10% of them actually end up back in jail compared to whatever it might be. I don't know what the stats are over here. So it's like we're going about it the wrong way. And I think if we can recognize the trauma that people have gone through and help them with that trauma, rather than make them feel like their actions are just a reflection of what's going on inside of them. So if we can look at people's insides more and help them to overcome that with a lot of the stuff that you're talking about, and many other people, and particularly in that book, The Body Keeps the Score, then we've got an opportunity to really transform society and really help people grow and release a lot of stuff. People are just it's a cry for help a lot of the time.
I think for me, that in a way that brings us back to grief, because when we bury those emotions, when we bury the grief, it deadens us too. It numbs us to emotion, to our own emotions, but also to other people's. That's why grief is so transformative. Next week, I'm starting a course called Transforming Grief for Our World into Sacred Activism. And for me, that says it all. That when we allow grief and loss, I'm not just talking about death and loss of relationship or all kinds of loss, when we allow it to transform us, we can transform the world, because we then have that sense of love and compassion, first of all to ourselves, and then to others, to everyone else. And that's my journey. That's the journey that I'm on. So that would be my response to that, really. And through reading and studying, just always having that sense of what can I learn from, great teachers. And, in our conversations, we've mentioned, Brené Brown, the wonderful work of Brené Brown, and her research into shame and vulnerability was astonishing when it first came out, about, that so many of us, we can't even acknowledge the shame that we carry, and yet we all carry shame. And what she discovered was people who were able to talk about their shame and to be open about it and to be vulnerable were people whose lives were so much more enriched and connected with others and had compassion for others. And that, for me, it's just absolute groundbreaking work. And she's gone on to do so much more. So there's another book, The Gifts of Imperfection. Amazing book.
My wife, Ruth, actually wrote on the mirror in our back bedroom, "I am enough." So every time you look in the mirror, you're saying, "I am enough." Because most of the time our mind is saying, "I'm not enough. I'm not good at this. I'm not doing this. I'm holding on to, they're better than me. I can't do this." No, I am enough as I am right now. No matter where I am in life, wherever I'm growing, whatever I'm developing, in this moment, I'm enough. And from that place, that's probably where the true growth comes, and the true willingness to, But I haven't read much. I've watched the TED Talks, and my wife's written, read her books and stuff. But yeah, she's a popular author now. And that's the thing that you're saying about books and stuff. It's so, I realized, I didn't really read much when I was younger. I only really started to read when I was about my late 20s, and it started with reading the Dan Brown books and all, not exactly, highbrow or anything, but they kind of got me into it. And then through my own kind of health challenges and emotional health challenges, as well as physical, that put me on the path of, looking to find help. And it became, self-help resources and books and journeys. And I think we go to school to be educated, but for me, true education has become through my self-education. And, always having a handful of books on my bedside table. At the moment, I've got a newborn baby, so I'm not reading as many books, but I've just started to be able to read again the past few weeks, which is really, really nice as I go to bed for an hour or so. And that's, for me, is when the true light bulb moments come sometimes. So I'm like, wow, this is incredible. It's so rich, and I'm growing and learning. And I know that you run book clubs, don't you, as well? And you have, you'll be doing them online now, I assume. Of course you will be. And I think that's something that I'd like to get more connected with, because I'd love to be, what I'd imagine as well with them books is sometimes I'll read a book and then it'll be finished and I'll pick up another one. But to actually sit with that book and discuss it and allow yourself to integrate that knowledge would be a real gift, I think.
Yeah, in the past I ran a book group, and one of the last book we did, I think, or one of the last books, was an Eckhart Tolle, A New Earth, which is an amazing book. And it took us about, I don't know, somewhere between 6 and 8 months to read that book, because we just kept cutting down on how much we would read. And at the moment, I'm reading I'm running a book group, facilitating a book group, which is a book called The Wild Edge of Sorrow, which is a wonderful book about grief, the sacred work of grief, just beautiful book. But what we found in that book group is the group itself. We talk about what's in the book, but that just sparks what we want to share about our response to that, the emotions that's brought up, where it fits in the journey that we're on. And obviously, particularly, we talk about grief particularly. So it's a beautiful experience sharing the reading of a book, because it becomes so much more than the book. The book is like a jumping off point, really, if you get the right book. So yeah, I'd highly recommend book groups.
It's finding as well. It's finding those like-minded individuals who you can really like delve into stuff and get excited about it. Because sometimes I'll share information about a book and I'll be really passionate and excited about it. And I'm like, enough, I'm not interested in that right now, or I'm in something else. So I think if we can build a bit of a community, really, which I think ties us in quite well to the fact that I talk about community quite a lot in this podcast, and the importance of us kind of getting back to our roots and reconnecting with ourselves, but also with people on a more human level. And I believe that you started a spiritual community, was it, in Liverpool at some point?
Oh yeah, I think that was like in 2013. Yeah, we started a community called Make Space. I started a book group in the summer of 2013, and which was great. It was with a couple of people, and then a woman came along, Karen, and she just wanted to be part of it. And we set up Make Space together. I mean, it was just a magical time. So we did that for maybe 3 or 4 years and ran events. And yeah, we had the book group, and had a great man, Graham, who used to teach us meditation and Tai Chi. And yeah, we did all kinds of things. It was lovely. It was really lovely. But it kind of came to its own natural end. I mean, I started it because I couldn't find the community that I needed in Liverpool at that time. Whereas now, there is a great spiritual community in Liverpool with lots of little sort of, inner groups within that. So that was a great learning curve for me. Yeah.
I bet it was. No, like you say, yeah, now 2021, the past 10 years or so have really grown. Like, it does look like sometimes from the outside world, like lots of things are in chaos, but there's also so many, we're being pushed to go down different avenues and, building a community, getting connected and stuff more with like-minded people and stuff. So yeah, it sounds like you've had so far, plenty more to come, but, an amazing, rich life. And what I admire about you as well is the way you've been willing to change direction. And it's not like a huge 180-degree turn, but it's kind of you were a nurse and you became a sister, and then that's evolved and grown into something else, where sometimes people can just get into something and then that's it. And that's great. But I think it's nice that you've kind of just kept on growing and learning and evolving, and each step of the way has been, it's been part of the experience that feeds onto the next. But it's a nice way to approach life. I feel that, be willing to stay open, to keep learning and keep growing.
Yeah. Oh, thanks for that, Rob. In the past, when I was nursing, my CV was just like every 2 years I'd go and do a different job and learn something new. And I used to think, oh God, when you look at my CV, I'm like, what's wrong with this woman? Why can't she stay in a job for longer than 2 years? But yeah, I look at the journey now and I just think it's wonderful. I love it. I love the change of, it's not so much a change of direction. It's more of a kind of, I want to use everything that I'm learning. So that means maybe doing something a little bit different. And also, like I was saying before about everything I'd learned brought me to this place of being with my sister. And now I feel like that about this work that I'm doing now around grief and loss, that I couldn't do that without being, first of all, an older woman, and secondly, all that I've learned and continue to learn through reading, through other people, through my own experiences and spiritual journey, is brought me to where I am now. And who knows where it's going? I have no idea. I've never had a plan, that's for sure. It's just all kind of evolved, and I'm so grateful for that. And I'm also grateful that I've got a husband who has just, witnessed it and been like, okay, that's, do what you need to do, because it's not always been easy. I did walk out of a job once. I won't go into detail, but I did walk out of a job once, and my poor husband had to just kind of be like, okay, we can get through this, and I did that because I wasn't being true to myself. And I was someone I didn't like at that point. And the only way to deal with that was to walk away from it and recognize the need for boundaries and to, reconnect with who I really was. So there's been some really tough times. When I look at the whole journey around grief, a lot of my passion and my feelings around that is related to having lost both my parents, a brother who died of AIDS, and most recently my sister. And again, there's a gift there, isn't there? I wouldn't be doing this work if I hadn't had all of that experience of grief and loss, which is a kind of sounds strange to say that, but it has transformed who I am. And that's what I want to enable other people to have that experience too. Yeah, so I feel like I'm in a really good place, even though it's painful at times, because when your heart opens, it makes you more vulnerable. Like when last weekend, a friend died, and then on the Sunday, a friend contacted me to say that her husband had died suddenly, and I was I was physically affected by it. I was kind of lying on the floor, and I knew that it was pain and sadness for others. And I knew that was because I've opened my heart to such a degree to receive my own grief that when that happens for us, we feel others' pain too. There's no escape from that. And, 24 hours later, I was okay. But I can hold that. I guess that's where I've got to now, that I can hold that grief for others. But it doesn't overwhelm me. And the other thing just to mention as well is, I wanted to mention is the memory tree, which I don't know whether I mentioned this to you before. Okay, so on the 1st of December last year, which was World AIDS Day, I decided to decorate a tree in a nearby, just a small park, because my brother Simon, who's a vicar, he died 25 years ago last year, and he died of AIDS-related illness. I just wanted to mark that day and commemorate it. So I wrapped the tree trunk in red ribbon, and I hung red ribbons in the tree and tied other things for, like my mum and dad, and just ribbons and hearts, knitted hearts. And I put a sign on the tree to say that what it was about, and also to invite other people to hang things in the tree for their own, memories of loved ones. And a friend of mine, Tom Seven, he filmed that for me. So there's a 10-minute film of the kind of birthing of the tree, if you like. And since then, obviously I go back regularly, and it's become a little bit of a a place to go for me now. And it's changed. The red ribbon around the trunk disappeared. Poppies appeared. Christmas tinsel disappeared. Things that other people had hung, beautiful things, have disappeared. But then other things have come. And recently I've gone at about 3:30 when children are around. So I've had some lovely conversations with children about their granddads and, you know, what's the tree and what's that hanging there, and, you know. And last time I was there, just a few days ago, there was a couple walking by, and they moved toward the tree and said, "Oh, what's it about?" And I explained, and then they were laughing. It's two men, and then they were laughing, and they were like, "Oh yeah, we're gay, we're gay." It was just so beautiful, and they talked about the tree and about AIDS. And as they were walking away, one of the guys turned around and he said, "We'll come back and we're going to bring a ribbon for Simon." And I was so touched by that, and it just feels like I wanted to talk about the tree because it's opened my heart even more, and I think it's for our community locally, it has opened people's hearts, and the film too. I think people have responded to, responded to the film, and it's just been such a wonderful experience, and I didn't anticipate it at all. You know, I didn't really think any further than doing it, and I kind of thought, I suppose things will blow away, and you know. And it's just been great. Such a lovely experience. I'd recommend it.
I think that's a lovely thing to hear, and a lovely story, and a lovely thing for you to do. And I think on that note, it seems like a nice upbeat way for us to wrap up this chat for today. But it's yeah, I will check out that video. I'll put a link as well to it so people can watch.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be good. That'd be nice.
The tree and how that's sort of the journey that's gone on. But yeah, it's a beautiful way to mark and honor and acknowledge your brother. So Jackie, thank you for speaking with me today. It's been amazing. If anyone wants to find out more about you, is there any links? How can people get in touch if they want to be a part of your, you know, holding space with grief and loss events?
I'm on Facebook. I think it's Jackie O'Carroll 1, and also I've got a YouTube channel now with the video on it. I think it's the Grief and Loss Project, and perhaps we could share my email address as well.
Yeah, I'll put all those on. No problem. Yeah, well, yeah, thanks for your time today.
Thank you, Rob.
It's been really nice.
Lovely. Thank you.
There we have it, everyone. That's my interview with Jackie O'Carroll wrapped up. I found that a really fascinating conversation, as you can probably tell. I think it's something that's important for us to acknowledge, to embrace, and to help us with along our journey. So if you enjoy this podcast, please share it with a friend. If you listen to it on Apple Podcasts, please leave me a review. That would help to get this podcast out there a little bit more and grow. If you're watching on YouTube, you can subscribe and hit the bell for notifications when new episodes come out. And if you really feel like supporting the podcast, you can become a member on my Patreon page for as little as the price of a cup of coffee. In fact, less than a cup of coffee. Each month, you can become a member and help to continue and support me to put out more episodes like this with interesting people that are doing good in the world, that are helping, having a bit more. Basically they are helping, and you will be helping me if you did that. So anyway, guys, until next time, have a good one.